So, okay, it's Ev on Everything, the badly misnamed podcast about lots of things, but not literally everything. I'm Ev, and I'm here to talk to you about culture and politics and current affairs and whatever else is on my mind, and hopefully on your mind too. Hopefully, it's gonna be entertaining, a little, and enlightening, hopefully a lot. Or if you're already an expert on today's topic, hopefully it will infuriate you as little as possible. Today, we're talking about constellations, but not cool astronomical constellations and definitely not weird astrological constellations. We're talking about new constellations. New artificial constellations that are made of satellites and that are becoming increasingly part of all of our lives. But before we do that, we need to talk about the bits of America that used to be French, the bits of America that used to be Russian, and the people who carved up Ireland before England even realised that kind of thing sounded like a good laugh. Anyway, if you like today's show, or even if you don't like today's show, you can find me on Twitter at Ev Buckley. Let me know what you think. And you can find the show at Ev on Everything. You guys must be awesome because you have great taste in podcasts and you're listening to this. So I love hearing from you. And that's enough of that. Let's get on with the show. So, in the long and storied, completely disgraceful annals of the appropriation of the surface of the earth itself, there are a few kind of milestones that even the most ambitious megalomaniac would be hard-pressed to beat. One of the biggest was the Louisiana Purchase, where France sold America 530 million acres of land that didn't belong to it, without asking the opinion of the people who actually owned the land, various Native American nations. It stretched from the Rockies to the Mississippi River and from Canada to the Gulf of Mexico. It was immense, and it cost about as much per acre as a few hours of parking does in New York City today. Still, that was more than they paid for Alaska, which was 2 cents an acre, paid for with a single cheque of 7.2 million quid sent to Russia, something that was possible back when the rest of the world still trusted America. Once again, the natives were for some reason not consulted on this, weren't invited to negotiations. They just woke up one day with Washington in charge instead of Moscow. If they had an opinion on this, it wasn't recorded anywhere because, at the time, nobody cared. Louisiana had New Orleans, the gate to the Mississippi River, and Alaska was another giant chunk of westward land that was part of the Manifest Destiny thing. So, the idea of some person just deciding they own a place that they blatantly obviously do not own, simply because they want some economic benefit for it, that's not new. Those are only 2 of hundreds or thousands of blatant land grabs throughout human history. We have been doing it forever. It's often forgotten that in the 12th century, one Irish king, Ruaidhri Ó Crithúr, took the kingdom of another king, Diarmid MacMurchada, over an unapproved marriage, what they used to call an abduction. Diarmid took the wrong wife, who was supposed to be sent to someone else to marry somebody else, and the High King of Ireland just said, "You don't get to be a king anymore. Your lands are voided, your titles are gone, get out, somebody else now rules." Again, didn't ask the normal folk of Leinster before he did that. But then Diarmid didn't ask them either when he got a Welsh guy named Strongbow to help him take it back. And when that worked, Diarmid said, "Strongbow, you can have the kingdom after I'm done with it." So Diarmid died and Strongbow took over. Now a Welsh guy is in charge of a big chunk of Ireland, and nobody was asked. Strongbow, of course, it turns out didn't have a very strong allegiance to the people of Ireland, having just rocked up there by force and, taken it off them. He gave the kingdom to Henry II of England. And we all know how that one turned out. Not well for anyone concerned. But what I'm saying is, trading land like it's penny stocks on the stock market is bad. But if you look hard enough, there aren't too many nations out there who can throw stones about it, not when you look at it in the grand sweep of history. We should have learned. We should have learned that it's a bad thing to have like one guy decide who owns what and where and transfer whole nations of people from one place to another at the stroke of a pen, right? And it was one guy a lot of the time, you know? Your man Diarmid just decided Strongbow could have that kingdom, and then Strongbow just decided Henry II could have it. There was a fella in America, Secretary of State named Seward, who just decided that America was going to have Alaska. Sure, there was a democratic process, it being America, but, you know, we've all seen recently how democratic America is when the chips are down and, you know, politics is at stake. Some guy just went, hey, Russia doesn't want this anymore, let's buy it off them. Same with the Louisiana Purchase. Napoleon, I think the third, just went, we can't hold on to this anymore, we better make some cash out of it before we're forced to let it go. And they just sold it. America ended up signing a bunch more treaties with the people who actually owned it. They ended up paying a lot more than they paid in order to actually gain control of what they paid France for. But we all know how that turned out for the people they were taking the control of. Not well for the Native Americans. It is not a good thing to let people just designate themselves the owner and broker and the designated economic exploiter of a giant chunk of real estate. So why are we still doing it? How are we still doing it? In fact, isn't most of the surface of the earth, maybe all of the surface of the earth, claimed by some sovereign nation or other? You know? Haven't we gotten past the idea that we can just buy and sell rulership of a place out from under the people who live there? I mean, yeah, it happened a few times in the 20th century, okay? The Diego Garcia Air Base in the Pacific is built on the land of people that were expropriated away from by the UK government, for instance, okay? But in its way, transferring the use of that land over to America was more like a compulsory purchase than it was like designating yourself the owner and executor of an entire kingdom, right? It doesn't make much difference to the islanders who lived there, okay? They still lost their homes, their culture was still erased, and an imperial power still paved over their land to aggregate it into a giant worldwide war machine. Not good outcomes for the people who are on the wrong end of this. But in terms of the scale of the acquisitions and the level of hubris that you need to execute them, surely we've moved on from the 17th and 18th and 19th centuries when people were doing this routinely, right? Surely we have moved on from that. Have we? I think if you asked most people, they wouldn't claim to own the sky. Because the sky is a sort of abstract concept. Sure, it's a thing, it's made of atmosphere, and if you change the atmosphere, the sky changes, right? But in a broader sense, it's not real. The sky is how we think about things. It lies across any particular nation or state and covers it. But you don't own it. In that way, it's a little bit like the feeling of existential dread that lies over all of the United Kingdom with the Tories in charge. Everyone's thinking, we're all going to die younger, we're all going to be dragged out of Europe and have our rights stamped on, we're all going to have our, ground destroyed with fracking, and we're all going to have our atmosphere poisoned with their economics and their, environmental policies. And a kind of a dread exists in every corner of the United Kingdom because of this, that we all share in and we all feel, but no one can really take ownership of it. It's real, but it's not real. And the sky is a bit like that, except most people love the sky. You know? Very occasionally, the sky takes a shot at you in the form of a meteorite or a hurricane or something like that, but mostly the sky is just one of the most beautiful things in your entire life. It's always there. No one can ever take it away. No one can ever change it fundamentally. The sun's still going to set. The sunset's still going to be beautiful. There's a bit in The Matrix where Morpheus, the wise man who handles all of the exposition, he says that humanity scorched the sky, that they basically destroyed the sky to prevent the machines who took over the world from using solar power. And I always thought that it was the most unbelievable thing in the movie. And we're talking about a movie here where humans are a good, efficient source of energy, and the 90s is considered the high point of human society and culture. And even 7 computer nerds create all powerful digital avatars, but don't take the opportunity to make themselves hotter in any way. As unbelievable things go, The Matrix is made up solidly out of unbelievable things. But more than anything, the idea that you could just destroy the sky struck me as completely impossible. You know? It's true that in the past there have been some things that metaphorically destroyed the sky. The dinosaur killing meteorite impact probably destroyed the sky. The material ejected by it blanketed the entire atmosphere in, you know, not exactly smoke, but particles. Okay. And chances are you would have considered the sky destroyed as that happened. It would have been years before it all fell out of the atmosphere. And for certain parts of the world, it would have been an occluding blanket. It would have been dark during the day. You know, they think there have probably been mega volcanoes that have done something similar. But at the same time, there was still a sky. There was still an atmosphere. It was still full of gas and particles and moisture. And the sun still hit it and it still was the sky. If you looked up, there was still a sky there, you know? And the idea that humanity could create any destruction on a par with that dinosaur killing meteorite is fanciful to say the least. All right. In fact, it's impossible. So that was always the thing that struck me in The Matrix as being the most impossible. Not to say, though, that you couldn't ruin the sky, you know? It would probably still work for the purposes of, solar energy, but you could make it an eyesore, probably. Just put a bunch of stuff up there, right? We already put stuff up in the sky routinely, aircraft and balloons and whatever. If you put stuff up there that just made the entire sky a real bad eyesore, you could probably consider it ruined, The kind of thing that you would expect to see maybe in Blade Runner. Giant, giant blimp made of video screens floating around the place, turning your sky that you own into a bunch of advertisement would be a pretty good way to ruin the sky. You're getting metaphorical now. The sky's still there. The sky's fine. You've just kind of gotten in the way of it. But, you ruined the metaphor and the sky is a metaphor, so it's gone. Or an abstract concept if you want to be very strict and email me that it's not a metaphor. It's a concept. Fair enough. Okay. Step back from the keyboard and don't email me because I'm going to ignore you if you do. The sky's a concept, not a metaphor. Okay. It can be destroyed as a concept. So yeah, you can harm the sky as a concept, right? If you change it fundamentally into something that we don't recognize or we don't consider beautiful, then the sky is damaged. But why would you want to do that? Nobody wants to do that, surely. But then nobody wanted to besmirch and destroy the great rivers of the world. They still did it because it made economic sense to do it when no price tag was put on the loss of the habitats, of the experience of being there, or just the inherent value of a relatively untouched and pristine natural world. Nobody was making money out of that, so it didn't factor into the economics. And if you're interested in that stuff, last week's episode on the way that the coronavirus lockdown might be affecting the natural world and how that might be a valuable thing to learn from is all about that. And it touches on these things, externalities in the economic sense. An externality in a big way, or one of the big externalities, is damage to the natural world in the general sense. If you found some way to exploit the sky economically that would damage it, well, in this day and age, we would still go and do it. But again, to go back to this idea of lunatic land purchases that should never have been possible, who thinks they own the sky in order to exploit it economically? How would they go about doing it? What can you possibly do to stake a claim to the sky? Well, the fact is you don't own it. Not really. You own it the way America owned the land that it bought in the Louisiana Purchase, which is to say, it didn't own it. Not at all. It awarded it the right to exploit that land economically, and after exploiting it for a long time, it just held de facto rights over it, and it took it in real terms. But when it signed the treaty, it didn't own it at all. The people who lived there owned it. The native nations that were there first owned it, and it took a lot of effort, a lot of bloodshed, and a lot of betrayal to take that land for America. Well, I don't think there'll be a lot of bloodshed in the sky. There's just not enough people up there. But in terms of how this whole thing works, it probably works the same way. If you want to own the sky, you just grab some rights as fast as you can before anyone can stop you. Move quickly, claim that you own the rights to do what you're doing, and just do it. And if you keep doing it, the reality, as it were, on the ground will change, and you will own it for real. And that's what we have to be afraid of right now. Why do we have to be afraid of it right now? If you looked up in the last few days at night, around 10 p.m. in the UK or across Europe, you would have seen what's going on. You would have seen an incredible procession of lights in the sky. A dead straight line of man-made satellites that crossed the sky right in your face. I mean, this thing is so long, you would not believe it. Dozens of these things. They are Starlink satellites, and they were put there by Elon Musk in order to bring the internet to places that don't yet have the internet. And if you're keeping score in terms of justifications for grabbing bits of planet Earth, this one ranks around alongside taking Alaska because, it's there. Maybe someday in the future there'll be a gold rush or someone will strike oil and then Alaska will be worth having and you can make a state out of it in the 50s. The groundwork that you lay is about staking a claim. And once you have the claim in place, then you can begin to exploit it in whatever way becomes economically viable once you have your toehold, right? So you start by saying we are going to give internet connectivity to people in very remote areas, but that's not economically viable. We're talking about multiple, like dozens and dozens of space launches. I think they're planning 22 this year alone. 22 space launches in order to put these satellites up there so that you can get internet to, remote Pacific islands and the, bottom of Patagonia and the top of the Rocky Mountains and places where there are not that many people. And you can't make it economically viable, but you're putting hundreds of millions of dollars into doing it. Elon Musk would have you believe that it is a gesture, that this is practically philanthropy. He's doing Starlink because people should have internet access, not because he intends to make a ton of money out of it. Which is not very believable, okay? In fact, it's the plot of Kingsman, The Secret Service, a movie that takes a perverse pride in spoofing the excesses even of James Bond movies. And the bad guy in it, played by Samuel L. Jackson, is basically an Elon Musk riff, where Elon Musk in the movie is less about space and more about Silicon Valley tech, but he does exactly the same thing. Gives free internet to the entire world. Girdles the whole world in his own personal communication network with the Trojan horse of free internet access as the, tempting carrot to get everyone to go along. In reality, there's a nefarious purpose behind it. I don't think Elon Musk would cause everyone in the entire world to psychotically attack each other at the touch of a button as a kind of weird eugenic doomsday device. But, that doesn't mean that he's got everyone's best interests at heart when he puts his satellites all over the world. After all, he's ruining the sky to do it. After all, he cares more about getting his infrastructure in place than he cares about your access to an unobstructed view of the stars. Maybe all you do is a little bit of stargazing every now and again, lying on the bonnet of your car in the dark, staring up at the sky and being staggered by the wonder of all of it. Maybe it's much more important than that. Maybe you have a ground-based observatory and seeing the night sky is part of your work. Either way, Elon Musk doesn't care about you. He doesn't care what happens to you. You are an externality to him. He wants his infrastructure in place. And if you believe that he's putting it in place just to get internet to a scant handful of people who can't get it at all but need Netflix subscriptions, come on. I don't even have a bridge to sell you. I don't think you could probably operate money and purchasing orders if you are that gullible. So to link this all back to the start of the show with those imperial colonial land grabs, the point here is that Elon Musk did not stop to ask your permission before he started tinkering with your sky. Okay? He didn't ask my permission either or anybody else's. He just went and did it. And if it harms us in any way, he doesn't care. It's more important to him to execute whatever plan he has for his project than it is to be a responsible member of humanity and check whether he is damaging the rest of us. In a very real sense, he didn't stop to think about whether he should do it. He only cared about whether he could do it. And if I sound a bit like Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park, that's intentional, because Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park is awesome. Even though he is a bit of a dick, he is very cool. And anyone who grew up in the 90s like me wants to be him, okay? At the same time, Jeff Goldblum in Jurassic Park throwing the truth in the face of John Hammond is actually quite an important lesson to learn, okay? Whether we should do things is is it only guides us when we make a moral decision to have it guide us. Whether we can do something is easy. There's loads of things we can do. But whether we should do it, we need to make a moral effort to have that guide us. Should and shouldn't are things we choose to subject ourselves to. Elon Musk has chosen not to subject himself to the shoulds and shouldn'ts in terms of the Starlink project. He does not care if he ruins your night sky. Okay, I have to admit, there is probably not going to be a raptors in the kitchen kind of a situation with Starlink, alright? There'll be consequences, but they're not going to be that bad. I went out to try to see it last night, and a slight haze of cloud coupled with the light pollution of Glasgow meant that it was completely invisible. Okay, you could see one or two stars there, but not Starlink. Okay, so it's not that intrusive, but it is highly intrusive when the stargazing is good. So when you have a really good day, very, very crystal clear, and it's the right moment to be watching the night sky for astronomical observations or just because it's beautiful, that's when Starlink can get in the way. Okay? And you can see video of this online. It's all over Twitter right now. You can see how bright and intrusive this stuff can get. I'm going to link to it on the show Twitter at EvOnEverything. Go and check it out because it is amazing. If it wasn't for the fact that it was going to girdle the entire earth in tens of thousands of these things, it would be very, very beautiful and impressive. And I'd be saying you should just go and see it and be awestruck by the achievements of humanity. But it is going to girdle the entire earth in thousands upon thousands of these things. And it is going to intrude right at the best time for you to enjoy a natural resource that belongs to you. So in that regard, it deserves close scrutiny. And that's what we're going to do next. We are going to have a look at what Starlink actually is, how well it can possibly perform, and whether it's even going to be a permanent addition to our sky. These things, constellations of satellites, there's more and more of them up there. Are they actually the future of what the night sky is going to look like, Starlink or not? We'll do that after this. So we've reached the midpoint of the show, and it is time to do the podcast dance. Thank you so much for listening so far. This is Ev on Everything, and if you like what you are hearing, which I hope you do, since you're still listening, you can find me on Twitter at Ev Buckley, and you can find the show on Twitter at Ev on Everything. We're on Instagram as well at Ev on Everything, and you can even email us if you like your communication old school. We're evoneverything@gmail.com. We love to hear from all of you because it makes my day much, much brighter when a fan gets in touch. We know there's a lot of you out there. There's people listening all over the world, and any kind of feedback is greatly appreciated. So thank you so much for that. If you can, I want you to get out there and press the like button on your podcast app, and I want you to subscribe. I know every podcast asks you to do it, but it is critically important. Last week we talked a little bit, or I talked at you a little bit, about the way that what this means is likes and subscribes and things on podcast apps. They contribute to all the algorithms that allow the show to spread and grow. I know a lot of people listen online, or should I say in a web browser, and that is wonderful. I'm so glad you're listening. The most important thing is that you're listening. But at the same time, if you just take the time for a second to open this up in your, iTunes or your podcast app, whatever app that happens to be, and subscribe to it, that helps me immensely. And it helps you get the new shows on time and quickly when they're released, because we come out twice every week, and I want you to get the show while it's still hot and relevant. Okay? So please do that for me if you can. Even if you can't keep listening, I'm delighted to have you on board. Okay, we were talking about Starlink and satellite constellations and how they might be the future. So let's get back to that as fast as we can. So before the break, we had my kind of polemical reaction to somebody putting a whole bunch of twinkly lights in the sky and wrecking up all of our view of the heavens. But this isn't the first satellite network. It's not even the first private satellite communications network. And satellites are usually, though not always, a good thing. Is Starlink a good thing? It's hard to say. It's hard to assess any major commercial enterprise like this in terms of its impact on humanity as a whole, whether it's a good or a bad thing for all of us. But we can try. Starlink is a satellite constellation, that is, a network of small satellites that work together to provide some kind of single service. It's run by SpaceX, and they want to put up to 42,000 of these satellites into orbit. That's the amount of licenses that they've applied for in America. Okay? They probably won't have 42,000 running, at one time. They don't need that many. But if they did, okay, there's less than 5,000 satellites in orbit in total right now of all kinds. All right? An extremely rough calculation would say that if they did put 42,000 satellites in orbit, there'd be a satellite about 100 kilometers away from every point on the Earth's surface at all time. It'd be moving at 20,000 kilometers an hour, but it would be there. So they'd be literally everywhere all over the world. Again, I can't imagine they're actually going to have 42,000 of these satellites flying at once, but that's the permission that they applied for. They'll need to be everywhere. They want to provide global internet services with these things. And to do that, they need to be close to everyone. Okay? You can do narrowband as opposed to broadband. You can do low bandwidth communication with big satellites far away. But to have the low latency that you need to run broadband internet, you need to be closer. Okay? Satellite internet right now can take a long time to transfer messages, and we're all feeling that at the moment, being locked down. Trying to talk to each other on video calls with a delay of any kind is infuriating. You can imagine what it's like for video gamers, Or maybe you are a video gamer and you know exactly what it's like. Latency is no fun, and every millisecond counts. Elon Musk wants this to have less than 10 milliseconds of latency, okay? Now, in 1 millisecond, light, or the radio waves that are going to carry this thing, travel about 300 kilometers. So the satellites can't be far away if you want a less than 10 millisecond round trip. Okay? Some low Earth orbit satellites are 2,000 kilometers high, and that's not workable. That means it takes more than 10 milliseconds to do the round trip up and down, even if the satellite itself didn't add any delay of any kind. So there's very good engineering reason for these things to be so close, but it's their closeness that makes them so visible. So it's a trade-off, right? Now, I said before the break that this is kind of like a gesture by Elon Musk. He paints it as a service to humanity. I mean, that's mostly just the way he tends to speak about things. He's evangelistic about them, and he views himself as being in the vanguard of the future of humanity. So he talks as if the things that he does with Tesla and with SpaceX and so on are the future. But this is definitely intended to turn a profit. Okay, potentially a very big profit if things turn out the way SpaceX is hoping. But it's entirely unproven so far. A lot of the world has internet penetration way above 70%. Parts of it, like Western Europe and bits of North America and things, it's above 95%. Okay. And that doesn't leave enough workable market for this. You know, I'm not going to suddenly start paying 3 times as much for my internet connection just so it can be in space. Works perfectly well as it is right now, and I'm happy with it. You know, the parts, though, of the world that have low internet connectivity, where there's a lot of slack in the market that SpaceX can pick up, they're not the remote ones. You know, they're not places where lots and lots of people live in inaccessible kind of landscapes that can't be connected to normal infrastructure. Instead, they're the poorest. Okay? Africa, South Asia, and Central Asia are the places with the lowest internet penetration in the world. And you can imagine why. Because the brake on rolling out the internet these days isn't about physical access. It's about equality and poverty. You know, India comes very low in terms of the proportion of its population who are able to access the internet. But India can build nuclear bombs. You know, it's not sitting there waiting for St. Musk to anoint it with broadband, baffled by these Western ideas about fiber optics. You know, India can handle broadband internet perfectly well. It's just got loads of people and not necessarily loads of money. All right? And that's what's holding it back. Now, in fairness to SpaceX, it's not claiming to be running a charity. Like I said, it's a business. It wants to make a profit out of this. But what I'm saying is the business case seems strange on a global level. In North America, yeah, you're going to find some people who are far enough away from properly high-speed internet that they're going to pay, apparently, I've read several $100s for equipment to install this, and then $80+ a month for the connection, okay? Potentially much more than $80. $80 is a figure thrown out there by a SpaceX representative. When asked how much this was going to cost, they said nobody pays $80 for rubbish service. The fact is, loads of people pay $80 for rubbish service. Internet connections are notoriously crap in a lot of parts of the world, even though they're expensive. But the point they were making is if they can do this well, people are going to pay more than $80 for it. Okay? If you can afford to pay the guts of £1,000 a year for your internet connection, you're probably not living in grinding poverty. All right? You're probably not part of the huge numbers of the global population who can't get internet access, because running a cable to somebody's home is not the thing holding that back. Okay? And if it was, okay, if you weren't able to get internet access right now because of your physical location, it's not clear that a giant array of satellites in space is the right way to go about it. After all, if you just need to upgrade the phone system in a small town somewhere, you know, you're in Central Africa and the network switches that handle your phones are just really, really old, and it's really hard for you to get proper high-speed broadband to go through them. I mean, you don't need a huge number of satellites to fix this problem. You just need a new telephone switch. And that's a solved problem. That's easy to do as soon as that infrastructure is invested in, right? So let's say you're making your decisions in this country about what you're going to do in terms of getting internet access to those people. Are you going to turn over backbone infrastructure of your nation to a foreign private company? I mean, you might if you're the Tories here in the UK, because, you know, they regularly just say, hey, China, come do this for us. But assuming that you have more common sense than a Tory government, which is a safe assumption no matter who you are, you probably don't want to be reliant on the continued solvency of SpaceX, the continued success of the business plan of Starlink, because you invest in it and it happens, and then there's no market for you to invite anyone else to compete. SpaceX would make perfect sense as an internet provider for an up and coming nation trying to modernize its communication stuff if it was one among a large marketplace. But it can't be. That's not its business plan. You know, SpaceX knows it's cheaper to do internet the traditional way if internet can be done the traditional way. So if SpaceX is running your internet, it's because no one else can provide it in that area. It's got a monopoly, and that's why you've ended up giving your backbone infrastructure to a foreign entity. Every bit of e-commerce, every bit of connectivity, every hospital that relies on it, every local authority that uses it, every individual person who's running a small business off the back of it, they all then are dependent on SpaceX. And SpaceX could come and go. Hasn't even been around that long yet. You know? Do you want essentially one billionaire in charge of this? You know, we're going all the way back to the original theme here. Who do you sell chunks of planet Earth to? Even if you're selling, you know, conceptual chunks, like the internet access for a whole nation. You don't deliberately sell it. You don't literally go, here you go, Elon Musk, here's your monopoly access to all of our internet. But if you allow all of the businesses, all of the high-tech parts of your economy and everything to become dependent on SpaceX, and you make it impossible for anyone else to compete in any way, you may as well have. And after that's been going on for a while, you become dependent on it and they own it. And owning the internet in a country, as we know now, is really, really important. In any case, the point is to allow internet access. That has to be a good thing, right? I mean, the internet can't have any bad side effects, can it? It would never say influence an election, would it? Okay. 10 years ago, there would have been no question but to say that having the internet in your country is a massively positive development. Okay? But with Facebook, Cambridge Analytica, and even from a certain point of view, with WikiLeaks and Edward Snowden and the like, there are legitimate reservations that a nation might have to suddenly opening up internet, especially under the thumb of a foreign entity. You know? You might not necessarily want sudden internet access for everywhere, only to find out that China is now running your elections, right? You might not want, if you've been running a closed shop government, to suddenly find out that everyone's talking to each other about how terrible you are. You know? So it may not be clear and obvious to a government why they would want to sell a contract to allow this to just anybody. You know? Why would you want to say everyone in the entire country can now send a check to Elon Musk for a few £100 and they get internet access that we cannot touch? They get direct internet access via satellites that don't belong to us to the rest of the world that we can't turn off, that we can't interfere with, that we can't even listen to. Okay? Now, I am no fan of surveilling the internet. I don't think it's a good thing. What I'm saying is, if you are looking at recent elections in America or in the UK, you might be thinking, I don't know if I want everyone to suddenly have internet access. They're not internet literate yet. We're talking about people who don't actually have experience with the internet. You know? Imagine all of those scams, right? I saw an extremely smart person, a neighbour of mine in a flat in Edinburgh years ago, take a cheque sent to her from some address in Africa to buy her piano with a spiel about how a student to use it would arrive eventually. And then when the inevitable email arrived saying, oh no, unexpected medical bills have turned up and we're not sending the student over and now we need that money to pay for Granny's surgery for something. Of course she wired them the money back immediately overnight. You know? And it was hard to keep a straight face when she was telling me how terribly everything had turned out. But this is an educated person in 2005 or 2007 or something. I don't remember. And, you know, imagine that person, except they'd never ever touched the internet before in their life. Imagine that person, but they weren't even particularly savvy about the wider world because, again, we're talking about places that don't have good communication infrastructure. Maybe you don't want to just let those people loose on the internet completely unsupervised, right? Now, again, this is wildly illiberal, and it's not something that I advocate for myself, okay, or for anybody else. I myself advocate for anybody. I don't think it's a good thing, but I can see the point of view of a government that says, listen, Elon, we don't want that shit here, okay? This is not for us. We are going to roll out the internet our way in our own time. We're going to control it and license it and regulate it correctly so that we don't end up with Facebook, so we don't end up with Cambridge Analytica messing with our elections, so we can watch out for the Russians, and so our government doesn't get torn down by some local Edward Snowden, and so everyone in the nation doesn't end up vulnerable to all of the bad things about the internet. You know? It's just a way that it could turn out. And I'm not so certain that that has been, war gamed effectively by SpaceX. I think they're so fixated on getting everything done the way they want it to be done and dragging the world forwards into the future that they can see, sunlit upland stuff, Boris Johnson style, that they're not stopping to see that some people might not want this. This might not be good for some people. And it might not be good for people in more than one way, because it's true that this is mostly about rolling out internet across the world, all right? But it's also about the exploration and exploitation of space. And I don't mean with twinkly lights that get in the way of your view. Though actually, there used to be a thing called an iridium flare. They were from an older constellation of communication satellites called Iridium, and they were a flare in the night sky. Iridium satellites were another constellation. They were for satellite phones, right? They should all be gone now, but they're not. And what would happen would be an Iridium satellite has a big reflective surface on it, a curved reflective surface, okay? And it would concentrate the sun's light on a spot on the Earth's surface, okay? And as it orbited, that spot on the Earth's surface would go around and around and around, and a lot of the time it would be in the night sky and it would be easily visible. It would be the brightest thing in the whole night sky. You could see it in a city at night. You could even see it if you were very careful and looking for it in broad daylight, okay? Now, most of these are gone. They were mostly deorbited, which is a nice way of saying they were crashed into the Earth's atmosphere at 27,000 kilometers an hour and they burned into ash. But some of them ran out of fuel and are wandering around uncontrolled, and a couple are still up there operational or semi-operational. There were 66 of these and a few spares. Many more since have gone up, okay, including a new generation launched from 2017 on. And the new generation, they learned from their mistakes and they've been designed not to flare like that. So in a way, it is also about lights in the sky. But the point that I'm getting at isn't. People raised questions when Iridium started going up in the late 90s about having so many satellites in low Earth orbit, okay? In June of 2007, a vice president of Iridium said, the risk of a collision on any given conjunction, that is, the crossing of orbits of two satellites, was 50 million to 1, and thus wasn't something that really needed to be cared about or prepared for. Then, in 2009, an Iridium satellite vanished. Okay, it didn't vanish. What it did do was very, very suddenly separate into at least 628 pieces. which is what tends to happen when you collide with a Russian military communication satellite at 42,000 kilometers an hour. The Russian satellite disintegrated into another 1,600 pieces as well, and then they all got cast in a movie called Gravity opposite Sandra Bullock and George Clooney, where they were subjected to the indignity of multiple violations of the laws of physics in a film named after a basic law of nature. But on a slightly more serious note, the International Space Station had to perform a maneuver in 2011 to avoid some of that debris, and the crew spent the duration of that conjunction in their escape capsules, because responsible spaceflight isn't based on a 50 million to 1 dice roll. I know, again, I'm going to get emails here. Yes, there are lots of random chances involved in spaceflight. A lot of them have odds much shorter than 50 million to 1, and we do roll that dice when we go into space. I get it. But the point is, you make all of the relevant efforts to minimize that risk if it's going to happen. Okay? You don't ignore it, which is what happened in the case of that collision. Okay? The blame for the ignoring may rest in different places depending on who you ask. But if you're SpaceX, you're going with the odds, because SpaceX has already had to move one of its Starlink satellites because of a conjunction like this, and they didn't do it. Okay? If you're SpaceX, you move a satellite into a lower orbit to practice deorbiting maneuvers. Practice crashing your satellites into the atmosphere so they burn up. And ironically, you move it directly into the path of another satellite. That satellite was there already minding its own business, though as the European Space Agency says, they operate that satellite, there isn't actually any rule in space that said if you were there first, you have priority. Okay? But I do feel a little bit like it should be skiing rules, If you're uphill and coming down fast at somebody who can't see you coming, it's on you to get out of the way, even if they do something dumb like sit there and don't move. All right? Well, the ESA satellite got out of the way because that's sensible. You say to SpaceX, we need you to move. SpaceX ignore you. You don't just leave your satellite to get smashed, potentially. ESA says it was 1,000 to 1, not 50 million to 1, 1,000 to 1. And they said that's way, way too high a risk for us. We're moving our satellite. SpaceX said they missed the email where the ESA told them to do this. So SpaceX used the same excuse that I used to use when I worked in an office and I wanted to skip a meeting, to explain how they just ignored the fact that the European Space Agency had a satellite that they were putting at massive risk. That's not how you want to run space when it's got tens of thousands of satellites in conjunction every single day. SpaceX want to expand by 10 times or a dozen times the number of satellites that are in orbit at any one time right now. Okay? They have applied for 42,000 licenses to put up satellites. And there's only about 5,000 there now. And when they were asked to be responsible about how to deal with, the congestion in orbit, they came back with, we missed your email. That's kind of an important email. You want to be paying attention to, one of the biggest space agencies in the world when they contact you if you think you're responsibly running a giant constellation of satellites, right? Not SpaceX, apparently. Well, that, I think, makes the point perfectly, right? Yes, there are good things about Starlink. It's good to have new infrastructure. The internet is broadly a good thing for most people, and going out there to get internet connectivity to people in far-flung places is a good thing. But that's all. It's just the internet, and it's just for a small number of people in very specific situations. Beyond that, it has no value except as a demonstration of the potential of SpaceX and I suppose, in a way, the potential of humanity, although we already knew this stuff was possible. After all, Iridium has been doing it for ages, just with less bandwidth. So this is essentially SpaceX showing off. Okay? They have rockets, they have satellite technology, and they basically, right, they had a hammer. They went looking for a nail. And they found this and they did it. And they went ahead with it without asking. And astronomers are worried, satellite operators are worried. You and I have to look at this stuff. SpaceX is plowing on regardless. Even when people contact them, shake them by the lapels and say, please get out of the way, you're about to wreck one of our satellites, maybe. That's not responsible. Okay? This is really deeply reckless misuse of our great shared inheritance. You know, the raw material, the natural resource that is orbital technology should not be co-opted just to get a few people commercially exploitable internet for SpaceX to make money out of. That is not what space is for. Even if Elon Musk will tell you that commercially exploiting it will lead us on to greater and better things like colonizing Mars or mining asteroids. We shouldn't have to look at it, we shouldn't have to get out of the way of it, and we certainly shouldn't have to rely on a private, profit-motivated corporation to do it, especially when the very first time it was asked of them to be responsible about it, they weren't arsed. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. It was Ev on Everything, and we've come to the end of the episode. Find me on Twitter at Ev Buckley and find the show on Twitter at Ev on Everything. As usual, like and subscribe and share the show. As I said, it's critically important to me and to the show in general for us to grow and, you know, for us to keep going. So if you like it, like it. Anyway, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again for our next episode later this week. Bye-bye.